Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Brian Rubin. We will be talking about cybersecurity issues today, and we have what we hope will be a fun and interesting hypo that we'll go through. And as we go through it, there will be different issues that pop up. And if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand, or there will be index cards you can submit, or you can use the app, which then shows up in this fancy iPad here, which will not be breached, and we will try to answer the questions that we can. So I'm a partner at Evershed Sutherland in New York. We used to be Sutherland, Asbill and Brennan. We combined with a UK-based firm, so that's what the name is. Previously, I worked with the SEC with the Division of Enforcement, and then I was with NASD with the enforcement department there, and I primarily represent firms being examined and investigated by the SEC, FINRA, and the states. And I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll start.
Hello, I'm Heather Seviano from Greenwich Investment Management. I am one of the directors and the chief operating officer at my firm. I'm responsible for the operations, our technology, and the client administration, and I've been there for 11 years.
Hi, I'm Frank Kinsella. I work for Cook & Beeler, an investment advisor out of Philadelphia. I'm director of IT, been there for roughly 7 years, 6-7 years. And before that, I was a network and system engineer for DuPont Capital.
Great. Hi, my name is Ascari Foy. I'm the head regulatory cybersecurity go-to person at ACA Aponics, which is a division of ACA Compliance Group. I've been here for the last 66 months. Before that, I spent 13 years at the SEC. I was part of OC's leadership team. I worked in headquarters and also headed up the exam program in Atlanta. Prior to that, I was in the industry. I worked with Credit Suisse Asset Management. I also worked with PwC, where most of my clients were asset managers, private equity, hedge funds. And I'm just here to provide some added value information to help you guys.
Thanks. All right. So initially, we'll start out with 10 maybe goofy sounding principles, but 10 principles to think about. We'll go through each of them, and then we'll go through the hypo involving a breach, some of it based on some real breach situations, some of them a little more interesting to make things a little bit fun. So first issue is dealing with plans. Obviously, it's important to have a plan in place, and the hypo will show what happens if you have a plan in place. And even if it's not perfect, having a plan in place is better than not having a plan in place. And one of the key things to think about, the breach may not be the biggest thing that you're ultimately facing when there is a breach. Everybody has been breached, will be breached, has been breached, but you don't know you've been breached. But when there is a breach, you have to deal with reputation issues, you have to deal with the regulators, you have to deal with litigation. So it is important to have a plan in place and try to follow it to the extent you can, and then everything else will hopefully fall into place. Second thing is lawyers and compliance need to be involved early, and that means day one before there's a breach, and that involves putting policies and procedures in place, training, supervision type things, when there is a breach, who to notify, and we'll go through all of these kinds of things, when to hire counsel, how to hire counsel. All of these are critical for before breach and after breach. Next, cybersecurity isn't just about information security, so it involves more than just data type issues, and by that I mean cybersecurity issues encompass a lot of different parts at the firm, and one example is training. So employees who are unfamiliar with cybersecurity risk issues and dangers might cause some problems. They might inadvertently give out their credentials to bad actors. So if you don't have training in place, that would be an issue. Fourth issue, know thyself. What does that mean? That means you have to figure out where your data is, who has access to your data, how you're controlling your data, what third parties have access to your data, things like that. And again, we'll focus on some of these issues. A lot of times people think of external bad actors, but you also have to think of your internal employees who inadvertently do something they shouldn't do, or employees who end up getting terminated or leaving the firm, so bad leavers, and how you deal with that, those types of people. The next issue is anticipate, mitigate, and remediate. So the issue here is you have to pay attention not just to your business and what you know, but things you're not that comfortable with or you're not that familiar with. And by that, I mean you should be focusing on peer firms that have been breached, regulatory action. So even if it doesn't affect you, you still want to focus on it and see if there are analogies or parallels to your own business. And you may want to look at other high-risk industries. So for example, ransomware attacks started at hospitals and medical centers, and then they expanded to other types of companies, including financial services companies. And as I said, all of these are going to play out to some degree in the hypothetical, and we'll get to it. Number 6 is look for single points of failure. So you have a plan in place, that's great, but sometimes something happens in the middle of the plan or in the middle of the process. So what does that mean? Maybe the CISO is the ultimate contact that you have to go to if there's a breach. What happens if the CISO is out of town or sick? Does that mean the plan just falls apart? So you have to anticipate and think of those things, and we'll talk about that in the hypo as well. Number 7, high-tech problems can have low-tech solutions. So what if the points of contact that you have for breaches are all in your Outlook system or an electronic system, and your system goes down? You're stuck. A lot of companies now actually have good old-fashioned little laminated cards to deal with these issues. So they have the phone numbers, the contact information of everybody who's critical if there is a breach. So that's a low-tech solution that you may want to think about. When a breach occurs, avoid kids soccer. So who's played soccer when they're a kid or have kids who play soccer? So what happens with kids soccer? There's the ball. What does everybody do? They run to the ball, right? That's not the way to handle a breach. That's not the way to play soccer, ultimately. You have to have a plan in place. People have different positions. They have different roles, different responsibilities. So everybody can't say, oh my God, why did this breach happen? Some people are going to deal with that. Not everybody can say, how do we deal with the clients? Other people are going to deal with that. And some people are going to be looking at the broader field, like the coach or like the parents who yell at the coach. So that's something to think about. I'm not one of those parents. Okay, so number 9 is, if you have to ask a question whether to notify, it's probably better to notify. So a question often comes to me, and we have some folks from the SEC here, is if there's a breach, what do you do? Do you have to notify the SEC, FINRA, the states? So the advice is, if you're on the fence, you should probably do it, because you don't want to have a follow-on subsequent action from a regulator saying you violated our rule or you violated your policies and procedures and you should have reported the breach, but you didn't. Number 10, the plans may be useless, but the planning is essential. So even if ultimately there are issues with regard to what you thought would happen and what you planned for, it's better to have a plan so you're following a process, even if you're not getting it 100% right. So initially there's a breach, at least for the first step, your plan should apply. All right, we will now go to the exciting hypo, and I'll quickly read through this so everybody should be able to see it. But you are in legal compliance for medium-sized investment advisor, or MIA, which is registered with the SEC, and you have an affiliated BD. At 8:00 p.m., Saturday night, May 26, 2018, which is Memorial Day weekend, so everybody's having fun doing something, you receive an urgent email from the company's CEO. She informs you that IT has told her that MIA is currently being targeted by a DDoS attack that has caused all of the company's consumer-facing mobile apps to be completely unavailable. She tells you she's tried to call the CISO, but he's boarded a plane for Singapore. Lucky him. And you can't reach the CISO for 24 hours. The CEO says, call whoever you need to get this fixed now. Start notifying the SEC and FINRA. I don't want them reading about it in tomorrow's paper. And before you put down your phone, maybe that's hyperbole, right after you put down your phone, you get a call from your head of marketing urging you to get out there in front of this problem, apologize to customers, assure them that we are fixing the problem. So something's going on, something big. What do you do about it? What's the first step? So Askari, who do you call? How do you start handling this issue?
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call?
So, Brian talked about a plan, right? But what's critical about your plan is you also got to test your plan, right? And testing your plan means you periodically testing your plan, meaning you take different scenarios and you actually bring your senior level folks in, your information security team, and you go through a testing of your plan, right? So just a quick example before I answer the question is, there's a different approach that you'll take if there's an attack to take down to disable a fund from a technology perspective, and there's a different approach you'll take if there's an attempt to just steal client data, right? So I have a client who has a playbook, and if you relate to a football team as a head coach, they got 300 plays they got to select for each Sunday, right? At the end of the day, whatever number is called, each person knows their role. So my client has about 25 scenarios that they have went through over the last 2-3 years. So their strategy is, if something does happen, they know how to respond from a DDoS account, from a DDoS attack, whether it's phishing, whether it's email compromise, whatever it is, they're confident that when something does happen, they can push the button and each person will know how to function. But is that reality going to happen like that? No, because it's not that perfect. So in this scenario, who do you call? The CISO is missing. The CEO is upset, right? The marketing people is giving you instructions. So at the end of the day, you go back to the plan, and there's a single point of failure here. You can't rely just on the CISO. So the CEO and the GCs are the ones that are most critical. They're the ones that take the brunt of the issue from the public, from investors. So at the end of the day, I think the first movement is, one, give the GC a quick call and say, hey, we got this issue going on. Give him or her an update of what you know. Say, hey, I'm going to talk to the IT team. You bring in your information security response team. Have that discussion. Talk about what's the issue. Have we found the root cause? What type of data has been impacted? What systems has been impacted? What's the mitigating factors have you guys considered? You got to ask a lot of different questions, because given the fact that the CEO is stressed a little bit and urgent, you got to get back to him or her, right? So what we tell clients is, if it's an impact on clients' data, if it's an impact on big critical systems, you got to have some type of reporting methodology, basically updating the CEO on an hourly basis or every 2 hours, just to give updates on the status, right? So what I'm trying to say here is, what's critical is you get your team in place, get a good understanding of the impact, who's being harmed, what system is being impacted, give the GC a quick heads up, but as a CCO, as a part of the legal team, really work with the information security response team and really get some good solid answers so you can be reporting back to the CEO, giving him or her an update. So I will stop there because you had one quick question of who to call.
I have about 12 quick questions. So, outside counsel, do you call outside counsel?
No, not as yet, right? I think you need
Come
to
on,
get...
please? No?
No.
Okay. No pressure. We'll get there.
I think you got to get your answers and the ducks in a row, basically, right? Get a good understanding of the issue, and if there's a determination that there's potential harm to clients, the type of data that's being stolen or impacted, you circle up with the C-suite and say, hey, maybe we need to go to general counsel outside, right? I think when you involve outside counsel, that's where the expertise comes in to really work with potential forensic teams, right? So I think it's a discretion, it's a judgment call, right? So I think what we have communicated to clients is you inform outside counsel when there's really significant impact. Because once you go down that route, you guys want to get paid, right? It's billing, right? So that's a normal practice. I think if it's no significant impact on clients, on client PII, I think you keep it in-house. But if there's impact on client data, significant impact for operation from a systems that could really compromise PII, that's when you go outside.
You want to do a little digging, you want to scope out the size
Inside
initially.
scope, yeah.
Do you contact the states or our former employer, the SEC?
So the first question with the states. So there are 48 states that have data breach reporting requirements, and basically they're different, and each state stand alone. So if you have business that you conduct in many different states, you got to have a good understanding of what those requirements are. If you got clients in many different states, have a good understanding of what those requirements are. So that being said, having a good understanding of where your clients are, where you conduct business. I have clients who have a map, particularly where their clients are located, where they conduct business as a firm, and they have a good understanding of what the reporting requirements are for each state, right? That's a rule number 101, to have a good understanding, have that landscape. And then two, there are different requirements for reporting. For instance, for some states, there's a no harm standard. Basically, regardless of what impact it has on clients or the breach, you must report, right? Some other states are less lenient, where you have to really, you have the discretion to report it or not based if there's client harm or if there's potential opportunity for client harm, right? So having that understanding of what the issue is and how to report and when to report by different states, it's very critical for you to have that understanding. But one key object here is there's an encryption safe harbor across the different states, right? So what that means is if your data is impacted and it's encrypted, if the system is impacted and at the end of the day the data is encrypted, you don't have to report, right? There's a judgment you can make to whether to report or not, but there's a safe harbor there. But any other data that's being impacted or compromised, that's not stored or electronically stored and not encrypted, that information you have to report, right? So there's different requirements for different states, and the level of standards are different, but having a good understanding of your business, where it's conducted nationwide or globally, but also having a good sense of where your clients are and having a good understanding of those requirements is a good start. But having a map, just like how you map out your systems and your data, having a good map of where your regulatory requirements are is a good start.
And what about SEC or law enforcement?
Those are my old buddies, right? So you make sure you have the root cause, you have your documents, you document the issue, you get a good understanding of what the issue is. If there's impact to clients, if the system that is being compromised potentially impact clients based on the weaknesses in the system that got compromised, yes, you should be proactive and inform your local SEC office and give them a heads up. But before you do that, I recommend you inform the FBI, right? Your local FBI office, if data was taken, if PII was taken, if sensitive information was taken. So that communication would be that you inform the SEC, let them know that we have the situation under control. These are the mitigating factors that we're taking. But we also have informed the FBI, and they're helping us along to really get behind of the culprit, right? So being at the SEC, I work with a lot of FBI offices, and they're willing to help. They don't have the bandwidth to help every single case that come in, but they're willing to come in to get access to your systems and really go through the forensics, look at the forensic report that has been submitted to really go through the process to really find the perpetrator, right? So it's good to be proactive, but it's always great to have a good documentation in place, demonstrating that you follow your policies and procedures. And it's already known, you're never going to be 100% proof, right? But being proactive, being transparent, really demonstrate your proactiveness that you're here to protect your clients and you understand that you're not going to be 100% proof.
And then the last question for you for now is, do you share this issue with others in the industry?
So if you're part of FS-ISAC and other industry groups, yes, right? I think there's opportunities there to help not only your colleagues in the industry, but you can also learn from similar scenarios and instances and experiences that other of your colleagues in the industry have experienced, and you take that back, right? So when you take that information back, you digest it, and you see how you can really enhance your incident response plan and incorporate what you learn in your incident response plan, right? So the incident response plan is an evolving tool that you should continue to enhance. As you guys go through your testing and your tabletop exercises that you conduct, whatever challenges or obstacles that you encounter from those tabletop exercises, you take that information and say, hey, we ran into a couple hiccups doing this test. How can we enhance our current plan that we have, right? So that's my answer to that. I don't expect everyone to have 25 scenarios, but when you go through your tabletop exercises, you should practice on different types of scenarios. So if something does happen, you have some type of playbook.
So Frank, we said it was a DDoS attack, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We'll see what the next slide says. But what if you notify too early, or what if you notify incorrectly?
I think the fear for the, is this on? I think the fear,
It's
okay. The fear for that is if you notify too early, you don't have all the facts. I mean, DDoS attack is basic, and it's usually just a brute force trying to get in. But there should be something else behind that. Maybe they're planning code that you're not aware of, and if you try to get out in front of it too aggressively, you're reporting not the whole truth. It comes across, so and you lose faith in your ability to judge the situation. And from a regulatory point, if you have to redo the facts over, they lose faith in you. So understanding what's happened and what's happening is important, and just don't try. Even though you're probably being yelled at by someone higher up, get out there, tell them. You should really have all your ducks in a row and make sure you understand exactly what happened before you get out and start publicly announcing that you have issues.
So there's a balance between reporting and knowing what it is that you're
Yeah, yes. Knowing what you're going to, you have to report, you should report, and you should be forthcoming, but make sure you know what happened before you report.
And what's a feint?
Oh, a feint. A feint is they're showing one thing, and while they're doing that, the DDoS is you think you're on attack and you're being attacked with this DDoS. But really someone in the background is putting malware on your system to either steal data or get access, or happens in cryptocurrencies all the time, just to get things from you that they don't want you to see.
Okay, and we'll see what happens with that. So Heather, talk about your incident response plan, if you will.
Well, I wanted to, I know Ascari has talked about it also, I wanted to put out there that within our firm, we have a client portal. And I also have access for all of my employees. So if they are not in the office and they need access to the incident response plan or our DR plan, each of the employees have a login. And so all of those documents are located there as well. So they have access even if they're not in the office or if they don't have it at their home. One other thing I wanted to add also is you have to determine too if the intruder is still in your system, and if they have already gotten out of your system as well.
That was the intruder. Sorry.
That was
Was that it? Okay, all right. Okay, so scenario number 2, continuing the story. Already responding to the DDoS attack, you receive a call from your office manager in Denver. She tells you they just received an email from their IT vendor / threat intelligence provider that there are indications that a wide variety of the company's information has been stolen, including customer PII, and it's being offered for sale on the dark web at a special discounted price. Some of the stolen data started trickling out onto the dark web as early as a week ago, so something was happening earlier than today or yesterday. The vendor has speculated that the DDoS attack may have been a diversion, a feint, to distract the information security team while the attackers went after more valuable data, including account numbers, names, and customers, including those in Colorado and Vermont, which are picked on purpose. The vendor offers to send a team to start conducting a forensic investigation immediately. So there's blood in the water, and the forensic team wants to come in and do what they can do. So does this change what happens and how you deal with it? So Heather, talk about the forensics team, if you will.
So the digital forensics team is going to be coming in normally through the cybersecurity insurance company and trying to determine if there is a threat and if they need to be paying out on that threat also. So they'll bring their team in, and they're going to go through the steps to determine when did the breach happen, like I said before, if the breach is still going on or if it has already ended, if the intruder has gone through and adjusted any log files. And so the forensics team will go through and try to retrieve as much information as possible in order to rebuild the scenario of what happened, just to understand how many data points and how many data points are out there that are at risk.
Okay, so one issue with the forensics team is obviously privilege. Does the company retain the team? Does the insurance provider make sure that you use their forensics team? Presumably, hopefully, you want to get counsel involved either inside or outside in order to protect the privilege, because you don't want everything that the forensics team discovered to be discoverable or produced to the regulators, to produce to claimants, to produce to plaintiffs. So keeping the privilege is important. There's sometimes a debate about whether it's better to have inside counsel or outside, and the answer is probably it depends. But I think generally firms like to see it protected so that you don't have to worry about those sorts of issues. Askari, 48 states, can you rank them in order? Which ones are more fun to deal with? Which ones are harder?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so generally, are some more difficult to deal with than others without naming names?
Yes. I was going to name names, but
All right. Didn't
no,
have
it's
to.
fine. So out of the 48 states, 11 states have the no harm standard, basically. So you have to report regardless of harm or not, right? And starting from the West Coast, you got California, Arizona, Nevada, North Dakota, Kansas, and Texas, Minnesota, Illinois, Tennessee, Georgia, and the Empire State, New York, right? Those are the 11 states that have no harm standards, right? So I think each state stands alone, not because you comply with one requirement for one state, that means you're covered, right? So I think I mentioned that. So I think overall, it's a case-by-case and a judgment call to determine which would be more complex or not. It's all based on facts and circumstances. I think some of the requirements for some states, you got to report it to the AG office or the government. Some of them you have to report to the consumer reporting agencies, depending on how many customers were harmed, whether it's 500 or 200 or 1,000. So there's different criteria. So I think on a case-by-case basis, once you build that map out, as it relates to where you conduct business, where your clients are, and that regulatory requirements across the board, you can really decide how you have that heat map on where you think you'll have more work and more challenges, and where it'll be less lenient based on the criteria for each state as you guys figure out a map as it relates for the regulatory requirements for your states.
So we talked about the states. What about reaching out to clients? How does that work?
So you should have a template, right? So taking a step back, it's critical that in-house counsel, whether it's outside counsel, in-house counsel, you guys found what the root cause is, you identify the mitigating factors, how you're going to move forward if something does occur again, and you understand the impact it's going to have, this communication is going to have on your clients and potentially your firm, right? So a strategy is critical, right? So through your guidance and discussions from legal counsel, it's critical that you have a template attached to your incident response plan right now, right? Obviously, it's going to be tailored based on the incident because you have to include the description of the incident. It's good to include the type of information that was compromised. It's critical to have a distribution plan on how you're going to distribute that communication. If you used to communicate to the client electronically, that's how you should communicate this particular notice electronically, right? And the information needs to be transparent and visible. It should not be buried in any other type of information. It needs to be conspicuous, very clear, written. I think really having a good communication plan for the media, if needed, depending on the size of your firm, because once you start communicating to the regulators, something is going to come out. Once you start communicating to your customers, something's going to come out. And you never know which media, local media, or whoever may pick up the phone to call you. So you need to have some type of message to communicate to the media, whether it's no comment, right? But whatever communication strategy you want to use, I think it's critical to have that in writing. So, and last thing basically is letting the customers know, basically, that they need to monitor their accounts. States like Vermont have requirements for the firm to restore a restoration process, right? That's required by law. So really working with the clients to have them restore whether it's their credit or the information that was compromised, but really going through the credit monitoring process with the agencies to pay for that particular service. So it has to be a very formalized process, but very strategically planned from in-house, but going through those particular steps of how you communicate to minimize the impact.
Okay. All right. So things have been interesting. They will now get more interesting. Your team, working with forensics investigators under the supervision of outside counsel, so we decided to go that way, has determined that the attackers are a North Korean Advanced Persistent Threat, APT, and that they were able to ingeniously exploit a known vulnerability in systems running a version of Windows XP, and we'll talk about Windows XP, to gain access and steal a wide range of consumer and business data. The technique is advanced, but the vulnerability had been identified in the company's most recent vulnerability scan. However, so there's a but and there's a however. However, certain systems had not been patched. Bummer. In fact, it appears the attackers went through the CFO's computer, those CFOs, because he was part of a formally recognized exception group, which included executives who didn't have to restart their personally owned devices connected to the firm system because they're too busy, which is required to implement the patch and other security measures because the process was considered too time-consuming and burdensome for them. Hopefully there are no CFOs here. At the same time, regulatory agencies are now requesting additional information about what happened and why it was able to happen. They are requesting copies of any reports of the forensic investigation's findings and questioning why you did not encrypt all data. And there's more. As you start to handle this piece of information, your insurance company has just left a message telling you that you must use one of their pre-approved panel firms to handle litigation. And there are other matters that urgently require discussion, like your 12-hour waiting period for business interruption coverage and a policy limit of $5 million. So does this change anything? Frank, was it a red flag that the vulnerability was identified but not patched?
Yes. Pretty simple answer.
That was easy.
That's the best one to come up with. XP is a no longer supported operating system, so if you have it, you're...
Anybody have it?
Anybody have it? Raise your hand now. Okay, good. Yes, but there could be a reason. I mean, the reason could be you have a critical software that only runs on XP and you haven't been able to come off of it yet. If you're in the middle of a process of a plan to migrate off of it, so that's a reason. Not saying it's a good reason, not saying it's justifiable, but what it comes down to in cases like this is you should have policies in place. policies like software currency policy, hardware currency policy, a patch management policy. Now, what the policies help you do is help you establish a baseline to hold everyone to, even though it's a CFO, he said, didn't want to have their machines patched because, or they had to restart. It becomes an issue, well, if it's a policy and now everyone knows about it, they're violating the policy and they're knowing it. And you have a lot more leverage internally to enforce it. You know, policies come down, particularly I'm an IT person, so IT usually controls the patching. It's a policy rollout holistically. Everyone gets patched, no matter who you are. If you start looking at your policies and make sure they don't have loopholes like this, it goes a long way of protecting yourself. That's for the patching part. Now, to go back to the XP, you should really do here, if you have a situation where you need to migrate off or you are migrating off in the process, document it. You know, come and say there's some type of risk analysis matrix, some committee that met and said, we have this and we're migrating off and here's our plan, you show your work type stuff. It'll be a little more looked upon a little more favorably. The reason why you haven't migrated off XP or any vulnerable software is you need to make sure that your business can still run while you're doing it and somehow to get this critical application off. So,
Heather, you want to talk about exception groups before we go back to Frank?
Sure, we agree with Frank. It's not a good idea to have any exception groups. It just makes everything much more complicated, and it's better to have everything streamlined so you don't have those one-offs.
Okay. Frank, talk about encryption. Is that required? When's it required?
It depends. It depends. It depends on the data. We use encryption, but it really depends on if you're sending anything in email that's PII, you should be encrypting it. Every firm should have encryption software that does this for you. It's pretty standard at this point. It's built into almost any email application platform. You can get it integrated, so you should definitely be running it. Now, it gets a little trickier when it's stuff that's inside your network, things that are on your file shares. And what people usually do is they set up safe areas where they're going to encrypt these level folders, these files to do it. So things should be encrypted. Understanding what needs to be encrypted, I think, is a better question. And it's kind of a personal choice based off your level of risk in your firm. So.
All right, Heather, directors and officers are increasingly being required to sign off on cybersecurity programs. How do you deal with that?
Well, the point of having the directors and officers signing off on it is making sure that they're aware of everything that is in the program and that they're being held accountable, and so that everybody is a cohesive team if you do have a data breach.
All right, bring your own policy. Bring your own policy. That'd be a good idea. Anybody want to talk about that? Bring your own device, Frank. And are there issues with that?
Oh yeah, bring your own device.
And your own policy.
And might as well bring your own policy when you bring your own device too.
That was a great segue.
Internally, I've seen it both ways where people just don't allow it. We give devices internet access, and that's through a separate network, separate internet access, separate everything. And if you want to use your email application or you want to use your work email on your device, you have to accept a security profile. That's the company pushes out. Pretty standard. And basically the profile says if you're going to put our email on your device, we have access to your device to wipe it if we need to, or disable it as we see fit. Now, you agree or you don't agree. If you agree, great. If you don't agree, you don't get the email on the device. And I think that's standard, and that's pretty much what's going on now. Hopefully most companies have gone away from, and I think they have, of allowing people to use their device for everything, even attached into their network, and get it to applications and stuff that they're running internally. I personally don't think it's a great idea. There's still lots of flaws, even in Apple. People who love it, and their security that are out there that you really have no control over, and you are not patching Apple or Samsung, Google, or anyone else. So I don't like it. It's still lingering around, but hopefully that goes away eventually.
Just by show of hands, who allows BYOD and who does not wipe with your BYOD? One, okay, two maybe. Something to think about. All right, so insurance contracts, any thoughts about requiring to retain certain counsel versus hiring outside? Scary, any thoughts about that, or Frank?
Our counsel's outside, so you're safe.
No, the outside counsel. Yeah.
What about exclusions for cyber events with some of the policies? And I guess one thought is whether the North Korean attack could be considered a military action, because there are certain exclusions. Any thoughts about that?
Exclusions, I know a lot of inclusions.
Inclusions, okay.
That are negotiable. So over the last couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years, right, cybersecurity, the deductibles have decreased, right, the premiums have decreased, and it has become a very competitive market because of the high demand for the insurance, right? So I think areas such as things that they cover, the North Korea stuff, no, that's not going to be there, right? But crisis management, asset recovery, network disruption, extortion threats and events, obviously theft and vandalism, but obviously it covers like the regulatory defenses, civil fines, and obviously reputational expenses and customer care, whether you're helping providing services for restoration. So I think as the market has been so competitive, it's critical that you really take a step back and ask the good questions and say, hey, can we include this in our policy, right? You do some comparison across different insurance companies to really put your foot down to have some negotiable power, because it's a very competitive market, and I think there's great chances that you can get some criteria in there in the policy to really protect your firm and for your clients. So those are just some key things that I've seen over my career of what has been covered and being discussed, right?
Frank or Heather, anything? to
I've
add?
also noticed when you get a policy, he mentioned they're all categories of different liability limits.
Yeah.
There's like 10 of them that I've seen for most of the insurance, and they all have different level of limits on each section. So there's fund transfer fraud has a different limit than network and information security liability fraud. Regulatory defenses, they're all different. So finding the limit that's appropriate for your organization is probably something to look at too. You may not even need an e-commerce extortion if you don't do e-commerce. So
Right.
understand what you're signing up for, and it's relatively cheap still. So get it if you don't have it.
Okay. We have a few questions which we'll go over. Has anybody done sort of a tabletop exercise or hypothetical of different scenarios with breaches like this before? Okay, all right, good. Askari, is compliance, and this is probably, and it depends also, but a question from the audience. Is compliance with state requirements based on domicile of your client, where your products are sold, or where you're licensed to do business?
Well, you're licensed to do business, right? That's the first step. But there's some cases out there where the clients, right, may not be in the same state where you domicile, and they go to their state representative, right? And as you guys know from a legal perspective, right, every attorney will try to make a case, right? So I think it's on the safe side to have a good understanding of where your clients are located so you can be prepared, right? And through the advice of your counsel to determine the communication that's needed for those clients in the states that you're not domiciled, right? So some of the states have that requirement, not every single one, but it's a case by case. And it's a big undertaking for you as CCOs and firms in general, but not just in the asset management industry, but just across any industry. Any data breach, like every entity out there has to have a good understanding of the classification of where they do business and where their customers are. And you really need to have a map, classification map, to really have that communication if needed.
Is that based on their tax domicile or their present winter domicile? Or both?
So I don't have the answer, right, specifically from those two options, but based on my research, it just states if you conduct business in the state, right? So if you're selling and offering products and you have branch offices or satellite offices in those particular states, yes, right? Even if you go out to do business potentially to earn clients and you obtain those clients, yes, there's opportunities there where you may have requirements to notify.
If a client moves to a state that you don't normally do business, they obviously move where they want to. I would assume you better understand what that state's rules are.
You got to follow them, yes.
Yeah, so I think you have to read the state regs to see what applies.
Yeah.
Frank, local server versus cloud, colon, it doesn't say that, but I'm adding that, colon, is one more secure versus the other?
Wow. Again, depends. Depends on how you're handling your situation. So if you have a really good secure environment internally, you are going to be more secure. I mean, there's, if you're out, and it does depend on the cloud platform, I mean, Azure, extremely secured, particularly if you go through the full suite of Microsoft products, they are very good. Most of you will probably be there in the next few years anyway. AWS is also very good. I don't think it's as secure as Azure right now because just to have their compliance department that gives you everything you need to be, to present to someone else about their level of security they go through. I would say, I would defer to say locally you're probably less chance of getting access to it because there's less entry points than you would be if you're on the internet. But you can make an argument both ways. Our firm probably in the next 4 or 5 years will going more towards the cloud. Banks are already doing it, and I think people follow the banks usually, particularly in the financial services industry. So you're safe either way as long as you have a good internal department and you have a good setup in whatever cloud environment you decide to go to.
Okay, next question from the magic iPad. Do we expect the SEC to require cyber insurance anytime soon? Ascari, thoughts?
So I don't have the intelligence on that.
No insider information.
No inside information. When I was there and we talked about just cybersecurity, it's a top priority and it's just a challenge to make policy because of the complexity of the asset management landscape. You have many firms of different size and operations and products that they sell, and it's just a tough responsibility to take on. So requirement for cyber insurance? No, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, and I think that's too granular
Yeah.
for even the SEC to
Yeah.
impose a requirement. We do have time remaining and a fabulous panel. Any questions? Yes.
At what point in the process did we notify the insurance company?
It's a good question. I think it depends upon what the insurance policy requires.
What you're covered for,
Yeah.
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 And knowing
So-
what actually happened too, so.
Okay, so you wait until after you've done your own internal.
Well, that's one of the,
Well,
you have to read the
it's
policy is one of the
I
first
mean,
things you have to do.
If you have business interruption insurance, and then you're kind of already in the policy at that point, so, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I need somebody assigned for that task. What else? Yes.
So this question actually comes from my CEO, who's also our CCO, our CO, yeah. So and then I just do work, basically.
This is being recorded.
But his question, which we go back and forth with all the time, we have encrypted emails and sometimes we have clients that cannot use it for some reason. They can't open it, it doesn't work. So it does seem to happen with one particular employee.
Is it a bank? Is it a bank, back and forth with banks?
I
No?
don't know. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But what this employee does is password protect the document and send it through. So his question is that okay? My answer was no.
It's
But
not
I
the
said,
same.
Okay.
You can get into anything, it's password protected, pretty much.
Okay.
Repeat the question, yeah. She loves her job. The question is, they require encryption for a client. For some reason, the encryption doesn't work, so one of their employee password protects instead of encrypts. So Frank said that doesn't work, it's different. The question is what your policy is. If your policy is thou shalt encrypt, then there's an issue with violating the policy. If the policy is looser than that, and if you're comfortable with the password protection versus the encryption, if it's not a requirement, then I think you're okay. And
We-
still loves her boss. Yes.
We've had that issue also where we have certain clients that just don't get it. So we have different means of getting them the document securely also. So we use ShareFile, which attaches the document onto the email, and then they have to receive the email and then download it. And then also we have a client portal. So we can push the document out into the client portal. They can then log in and retrieve it that way as well.
Okay, I will give those out.
So try other ways.
And a question in the back.
Yeah, I don't know if you touched on this, maybe I missed it, but the scenario where the breach was possibly a North Korean entity, wouldn't the first cause of action be notify the FBI?
So the question is, where the breach was caused by the North Korean entity, shouldn't you inform the FBI? And we talked about informing law enforcement under the first scenario. But yeah, at some point along the line, it makes sense, as Ascari said, to inform your local FBI about what's going on.
So
Yes. And
to your
don't just
question-
tweet about it, by the way.
Doesn't work.
Sorry.
yes, if that's the conclusion, I would do that immediately.
Yes.
This is probably kind of a really dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If email is encrypted, is the issue with password protected document one that, assuming that the email is breached, then it becomes easy to get into the document? Because otherwise, wouldn't the encryption also cover the attachment?
If the email,
We talked about email
Right.
and all standard programs.
and I'm trying to repeat the question, so I want to make sure I understand. Say it again.
Okay, if you have encrypted email, we assume we all have it.
Encrypted email,
This day, the issue in particular with the password protected.
but the document attached to the email is password protected.
I'm concerned primarily because a hacker then might get into the email and then the document itself is much more vulnerable? Or is it that the email encryption doesn't cover the attachment?
So you got that, Frank?
Yeah, it's kind of, the document can be pulled off, and then you can run anything against it. There's plenty of software that can break the document open relatively quickly.
It's not part of the native encryption.
Right, so if you encrypt it, it's going to take a really long time for them to get access to it. You know, it could be years, depending on how the level of encryption you used. But a password on a document is usually embedded in the metadata of the document, and you can just pull it out. So,
What if the password is in a
Password?
separate email? No, in a second email, not with the attachment.
is the email encrypted?
Yes.
Then you're good. Then you're good.
Yes.
For those with foreign investors, or potentially in the future with foreign investors, looking for the GDPR and kind of the EU rules, do you have a sense of where things stand presently, or kind of best practices for mid-sized firms that have that? And then we also have
I was going to say you should be in the large firm section, but I don't know. Do you have thoughts?
So it's a race to the finish line, right? I think the due date is May 25th, and there's a lot of consulting work being done because of the lack of expertise within the shops. So I think the process is so streamlined that third-party consultants are providing that service. So I think from a best practice perspective, I won't recommend trying to do it now because it's a big learning curve. I think leveraging third-party consultants to do it for you, they have the templates, they have the tools that they can get people ready, up and running pretty quick, basically. But it's a race to the finish line.
There was a question in the back. Yes.
Within the context of small and medium-sized firms, how would you, or could you speak to the cost benefit for testing?
Pin testing, you said? So cost
Yeah.
benefit running pin testing for small to medium-sized firms.
We do it. It depends on what type of pen testing is kind of internal, external. It's inexpensive. I mean, you can get an external test done for $1,200, from a very reputable firm that tests all your access points from external. And if you go internally, you need to sign an NDR, obviously, because they're going to find stuff. Every network has issues, but it's not expensive. not now, there's so many people competing for that business, and that you can get it done relatively cheap, and it's worth it.
Okay, question from the iPad. Employee training is really important. We said that,
The most
good.
important.
We use a company called KnowBe4. Do you recommend anyone? I don't think we can recommend anybody, but anybody have other ones that they use and like? Anybody? Yes?
We've used speaker from the local InfraGard, which is the FBI private, public thing, and they've been very good.
Okay. InfraGard, you said?
InfraGard.
Okay.
It's set up by local FBI.
All right, anybody else have thoughts? And there's another question for free advice here. Do you recommend a password company like LastPass?
As a password management?
Yeah.
That's a good question, because I'm trying to think that big password company just got hacked.
Right.
Yeah, right. They needed a different company to help them.
Yeah, I don't know the company's name, but yeah, I mean, I don't really have an opinion on password things. I do know that it's tempting when you put all your passwords in one spot to just go after that one spot. So,
Yeah.
Any other, yes?
I understand emailing encryption. You mentioned another type of encryption, a
file level.
file level.
So the question is, what's that about file level encryption? Yeah. Okay.
People, if you're a high net worth company, chances are you have your client's social security number somewhere on a new account form, something like that. Now, you're going to put that file on your network. It's open to anyone who can get on your network. You have security in place, but technically, if someone can get on, they can probably get access to it. Another safeguard for that would be encrypt the file that's on the network also, because it does contain PII. And it's very common. Lots of desktop and server management software comes with it built in that you can just choose a location that you're going to create either some type of security around it, where you're going to encrypt anything that's inside that location. So it depends on the software you use. You can encrypt the file individually with an extra, or you can have it where it runs and anything dropped in that folder location will be encrypted.
What type of software can you get to do that? Just maybe for laptops, as well as.
I don't know if we can tell anyone who to use, but there's lots of encryption. Windows 10 comes built in with BitLocker at this point. You can encrypt a laptop just by clicking a button.
Clicking a button.
So but on a server level, you're usually going to want to install some software and have it run in the background. No, I mean, you can get it done for a few $100, and depending on how big the deployment is and what software you're using.
Yeah.
Yes.
With migration to the cloud, are there any best practices that you all recommend? So, for example, we use Amazon Web Services for our client portal, but within that portal, all of our client names are code names, and we don't use any account numbers, and there's a firewall there that prevents allegedly anyone from getting into that portal to then getting into our network. And then with our cloud-based backup, that's encrypted and only we have the key. Nobody else has the key. So are there things like that if you're going to migrate to the cloud, what you all can recommend to protect that data, even from being collateral damage if somebody else in that cloud space is breached and your data is accessed
Right.
just because it's there?
For cloud environments, you're pretty sectioned off. So that's not. I mean, the exception of the meltdown thing that happened to chips recently. There's no real access to your data from someone else's. So you're pretty secure in that way. You can always encrypt in data in the cloud too. So if you have file level stuff, you can run encryption against that. If you want an extra level, when you start giving access to anything, you need to have good things in place for that. You can do authentication,
MFA.
multi-level. That's kind of what I would go with it. More than just a login, username, and password, you can hit the multi-factor authentication is probably a safe bet. Even though you're doing a good thing by creating, there aren't actually the account numbers, there are different codes and stuff like that. But when you're giving access, try to do multi-level authentication, multi-factor. Thank you.
MFA, yeah.
And
All
make sure
right.
you're doing a site visit also.
Yeah.
I said make sure you're doing a site visit also. go to the data centers, go investigate what's going on, and continue to go back.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because if there are issues or breaches, you'll often be asked about that. So our time is up. Thank you.